Hello again. I'm still in step 1, base painting, but I'm going to show you one of the techniques in base painting, which is technique number 3 in the written directions, and I have called it dry brush layer. That's the name I gave it. So I'm going to come closer to the camera to show you what I'm talking about because I think you can't really get the effect from back here. But the dry brush layer technique is a very popular technique. It's a little rustic, a little farmhouse chic. There you go. The dry brush layer is basically 2 coats of paint, usually a darker one on the bottom, and then white or another lighter color on top. We're gonna dry brush that on. So this little tray has that sort of finish. And I have another piece around here somewhere. Here it is, right back here. This has the same finish, but I wanted to show you that it looks a little bit different than the tray. And we'll go over this, but you can put as much or as little, as thick or as thin as you like with the second coat. So you can give it a different look. You can also sand this coat to make it smoother, or in this case I didn't sand, so it's a little rougher. So we'll go over that. So step 1, if you'd like to achieve a multi-layered look, any multi-layered look with our kits, it's the same technique that you used in the base painting. So the video I just showed, just the basic base painting. You pick a color, nice light coat, right? Just solidly coat your piece. That's the first thing you're gonna do. Now, you can also choose to use our faux stain technique, and there is a video on that as well. Let me see what I put for the faux stain. Hold on one sec, sorry. Faux stain is base painting technique 1. So if you watch the faux stain video, you like that look where it looks like it's stained, but it's just paint and water. So you can watch the video to see how to get this look. So you're either going to faux stain it, or you're going to give it a solid coat of paint. Either way, you've got coat 1 on the board, and you're gonna let that dry. So this is a completely dry, faux stained little cake stand, ready to go. Once it's completely dry, you're going to use one of these paintbrushes, so like an actual paintbrush, and you're going to dip it into whatever color you want that top layer to be. So typically it's a darker color on the bottom and then white on top. So you want something that will contrast with white. On the little tray I showed you, I actually did light gray, but it's a subtle contrast, but it still works. So in this case, I'm doing a faux stain brown, and I am dipping just the little tip of the paintbrush into my little cup of paint, okay, white paint, I'm using white. Then I'm going to blot this off. So you can blot this off on like scrap paper. I'm using the top of the paint lid. I'm just doing a little dab. I just want to take some of the paint off of my paintbrush. So dry brush. So this paintbrush is a dry paintbrush with a little bit of paint. And now I'm going to go, I say, with the grain. Now it doesn't matter too much, but I'm gonna go in the direction of the grain, which I'm gonna say is horizontal here. And you just wanna lightly, light pressure. I'm just going back and forth over the piece, okay? Now, it's totally okay if some areas are heavier than others. So if you look at it, I've got like one area where it's a little heavy and the others are lighter. I'm gonna go back into my paint, blot, get some of that paint off of my brush, and I'm gonna keep going until the whole piece is coated. Now, this is to your preference, just like sanding, all right? You can decide if you want more or less white. There is not a right or wrong answer. So if you kind of just want a little bit of white in here like this, you kind of just want it like speckled in, you want to go very lightly, very light pressure, not too much paint at all, almost no paint. Back and forth with the grain, same direction, okay? I'm gonna bring it up a little closer too, just to make sure. I know it's hard with the light, so this is where I'm at. All right, so some areas, as I said, they have a little bit more paint, they're a little globbier. So I can do one of 2 things. I can decide to add more paint all over, Or I can let this dry and I can sand down the areas that are a little globby. I can sand those down a little bit to take away some of the paint. Now it shouldn't be uniform all over. You don't want it to look perfect. So it's okay to have some areas that are thicker and thinner. Just for the purposes of this video, I'm going to add more paint because I want to show you that you can also make this layer a bit thicker. You could have a heavier layer of white, okay? You could have less of this brown peeking through. You're gonna do the exact same thing. So I'm pretty much doing, let's say, a second coat with the white, get a little bit of paint, dab, dab, dab. One of my favorite things about this technique is the way that it catches on the edges. So when you are going on the edge here, if you bring the brush just like right over the edge and kind of pull it forward, the way that it catches on the edge, I just love how that effect looks. It looks great on everything. I know I have a circle here, but it looks great on square pieces as well. All right, so I'm just gonna try, hopefully, to angle my camera down. Woo! My paint table here. All right, so I just want you to be able to see. I'm just adding some more white, catching it on the edge a bit. Okay, but I'm just adding a thicker layer of white on here just to show you that it really is okay to have a thicker layer if you want it. Totally your preference. If you liked it with the thinner layer, you can leave it that way. If you feel like you want to keep going, you can keep going. This is where I suggest to everybody, always start with less, and then you can always add more. So in the beginning, I was very cautious. I just added a little bit, but I decided I want to go a little bit heavier. So I'm just going to add more. And remember that this is all a process. So you don't have to have your whole project figured out before you do it, right? You can kind of play with it, experiment as you go, and create. All right, so now I've got the whole thing mostly covered in white and just a little bit of brown peeking through. Sorry, it's just the lighting makes it hard to see the detail. There you go. So that's what we look like now. And I'm gonna let this dry. And once it's dry, you can decide to leave it as is if you like the way it dries, or you can decide to sand it. So I'm gonna bring back the original piece that I had, and we are going to cover sanding in the next video. Step 2 is sanding, which is optional, but just want to show you a little bit of what this 2-color dry brush system looks like after a little sanding, okay? So I'm gonna lay it right here, and I'm just gonna sand, and I'll go over sanding the next one, but I always just fold it in half and just go with the grain. So the more pressure, the more paint you take off. Less pressure, less paint. But just for comparison's sake, I want to give you a look at sanded versus unsanded. Okay, so I was pressing pretty hard here, and I just want to show you that where it's sanded, you've got your white and your gray, they sort of blend together and they smooth out. Underneath, where it's unsanded, you see how you keep 2 distinct layers, and it's a little rougher. Neither of these is the right answer. So it's completely personal preference, and it's all about how you want your finished piece to turn out. So feel free to play with that. I will say, I think the more layers you add to anything, the more dimension you give it, the better. So I love the dry brush layer, and I love sanding that dry brush layer, so then you get your first layer, your dry brush, and some of the real wood coming through. I think that's like, it looks very sophisticated. The more layers, the better. It's a nice look. You can even sand it, if you want to go like crazy, you can add your dry brush layer again. So you don't have to stop with just that one, right? If we're creating and we're playing, and like I said, I love more layers, you could sand it a little bit, and if you don't like the sanding, or if you just want to add a little more dimension, you can sand it and you can add that layer, another layer back in. So you could keep going pretty much indefinitely with the amount of grays and whites that you put on this board, or browns and whites, or whatever colors it is that you choose for your dry brush layer. All right, so have fun with that. And if you're ready, you can move on to step 2, which I kind of already got into, was the sanding, but very pertinent with this layer. All right, have fun.